Imagine a world ruled by warriors, where power is measured in horses and legends are forged in battle. In the heart of the Mongol Empire, one woman shattered every expectation. KHUTULUN, the princess who could out-wrestle, out-fight, and outthink the greatest men of her age. Her story is not just about strength, but about defiance, loyalty, and the courage to choose her own destiny. As armies clashed and empires trembled, KHUTULUN stood unbroken, a symbol of possibility in a world that tried to cage her. This is the forgotten legend of the Mongol princess who could beat every warrior and whose legacy still challenges us to be fearless even today. The wind howls across the endless grasslands of Central Asia, carrying with it the scent of horses, sweat, and the distant echo of war drums. In the heart of the Mongol Empire, where the sky seems to stretch forever and the earth is both cradle and battlefield, legends are born and forgotten with the turning of the seasons. But some legends refuse to fade. Some names, whispered around campfires and sung in the songs of warriors, grow only brighter with time. This is the story of one such name, a name that struck fear into the hearts of the bravest men, a name that defied every expectation, every tradition, every rule written by men for men. This is the story of KHUTULUN, the Mongol princess who could beat every warrior. Imagine a world where power is measured in horses and blood, where the fate of nations is decided not in marble halls, but on the open steppe, beneath the watchful eyes of the eternal blue sky. The Mongol Empire, at its height, was the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. It was a world ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan, a world where strength was everything and weakness meant death. Into this world, KHUTULUN was born, not as a footnote, not as a pawn, but as a force of nature. Her story begins in the year 1260, in the camp of Genghis Khan, a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, and a man locked in a bitter struggle for the soul of the Mongol Empire. Genghis was a warlord, a strategist, a man who understood that survival depended on adaptability. He had many sons, 14 in fact, each one raised to ride, to fight, to lead. But it was his only daughter, KHUTULUN, who would become his greatest ally and his fiercest defender. From the moment she could walk, KHUTULUN was different. While other girls learned the arts of diplomacy and marriage, she learned to ride bareback at full gallop, to shoot arrows from horseback, to wrestle, and to fight. Her father saw in her a spark, a wildness that could not be tamed. He trained her alongside her brothers, not as a novelty, but as an equal. The training was brutal. The Mongol steppe is not a place for the weak. Children learn to survive on dried meat and fermented mare's milk, to endure the biting cold and the searing heat, to read the land and the sky as if their lives depended on it, because they did. By the age of 10, KHUTULUN could outride boys twice her age. By 12, she could wrestle grown men to the ground. By 15, she was training with her father's elite guard, matching them move for move, blow for blow. But it wasn't just her strength that set her apart. It was her mind, sharp, quick, unyielding. She saw patterns in chaos, opportunities in danger. She understood that to survive in a world built for men, she would have to be better than any man. And so she was. The stories of her feats spread across the steppe like wildfire. Warriors spoke of the princess who could outfight any challenger, who could ride into battle and return with the spoils of victory. But KHUTULUN was not content to be a curiosity, a sideshow. She demanded respect, and she earned it the only way the Mongols understood, through combat. It was in the wrestling ring that KHUTULUN truly became a legend. Wrestling was sacred to the Mongols, a test of strength, skill, and honor. It was said that a true warrior could defeat any opponent, regardless of size or age. KHUTULUN took this tradition and made it her own. She issued a challenge. She would marry any man who could defeat her in wrestling, but there was a price. Every man who lost would owe her 10 horses. The suitors came, drawn by her beauty, her reputation, and the promise of alliance with Genghis Khan. Princes, generals, champions, each one confident, each one certain that he would be the one to tame the wild princess. Each one left defeated, humiliated, and lighter by 10 horses. The numbers grew. 10 horses became 100, 100 became 1,000. According to Marco Polo, who traveled through the Mongol lands and heard her story firsthand, KHUTULUN amassed over 10,000 horses from her defeated suitors. 10,000, enough to field an army, enough to make even the wealthiest Khans envious. But these were not just victories, they were statements. Every time KHUTULUN stepped into the ring, she was declaring to the world that she was not property to be traded, not a prize to be won. She was a warrior, an equal, and she would choose her own fate. The matches became events. People traveled for weeks to witness them. Bets were placed, songs were sung, and with each victory, KHUTULUN's legend grew. Yet for all her strength, for all her victories, KHUTULUN was not immune to the pressures of her world. Her father, Kaidu, saw in her both her greatest asset and her greatest challenge. He needed alliances, needed to secure his position against rivals like Kublai Khan, who ruled from the east and claimed the title of Great Khan. Marriage was a weapon, a tool of diplomacy, but KHUTULUN refused to be used. The tension between father and daughter simmered beneath the surface, a battle of wills as fierce as any fought on the steppe. Kaidu pressed her to marry, to fulfill her duty as a princess of the Golden Family. KHUTULUN stood her ground, her resolve unbroken. She would marry only a man who could defeat her, and so far, none had come close. But KHUTULUN's story is not just of defiance. It is a story of loyalty, of love, of sacrifice. She was her father's right hand, his most trusted commander. In battle, she was fearless, leading charges, capturing enemy generals, turning the tide of war with her presence alone. Her soldiers called her the shield of her people, a protector who would risk everything for those she led. As the years passed, KHUTULUN's legend only grew. She became a symbol, not just for the Mongols, but for anyone who dared to defy the limits placed upon them. Her story, passed down through generations, became a beacon, a reminder that greatness knows no gender, that courage is not the sole domain of men.
But legends, no matter how bright, are always shadowed by the world that creates them. For KHUTULUN, every victory in the wrestling ring, every triumph on the battlefield, was met with whispers and doubts. How could a woman, even a princess, defeat the strongest men of the steppe? How could she command the loyalty of hardened warriors, men who had spent their lives in the saddle, who measured worth in scars and stories? The answer, for many, was simple. She must be cheating, or worse, she must be using magic. The chroniclers of her time, mostly men, struggled to fit her into the narratives they understood. Some called her a sorceress, others accused her of using poison or trickery. But those who fought beside her, who saw her in the chaos of battle, knew the truth. KHUTULUN was simply better. Her reputation was not built on myth alone. The Mongol world was a meritocracy, at least in theory. The steppe did not care for birth or beauty, it cared for results. Kaidu, her father, was a practical man. He could not afford to ignore talent wherever it appeared. And so, when the time came to choose commanders for his armies, he did not hesitate. KHUTULUN was given real authority, not as a figurehead, but as a leader of men. She led cavalry charges, devised tactics, and inspired her troops with her presence. In a world where most women were expected to seal alliances through marriage, KHUTULUN sealed her place in history through victory. One of the most famous stories about KHUTULUN comes from the wars between her father and Kublai Khan. The Mongol Empire, once united under Genghis Khan, had fractured into rival khanates. Kaidu, ruling from the west, refused to acknowledge Kublai's claim to be the Great Khan. The two sides clashed again and again, armies sweeping across the steppe in a deadly dance of power and pride. In one such battle, Kaidu's forces found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The enemy had positioned a reserve force to cut off any retreat, a classic Mongol tactic turned against them. KHUTULUN, riding at the head of a contingent of 300 horsemen, saw the trap. Where others might have hesitated, she acted. Splitting her force, she sent 200 riders to feint an attack, drawing the enemy reserves away. With the remaining 100, she circled wide, using the land itself as cover. When the moment was right, she struck, not at the enemy's front, but at their heart. Her riders crashed into the command post, scattering officers and sowing chaos. In the confusion, KHUTULUN performed a feat that would become her signature. She rode straight at the enemy general, leaned from her saddle, and pulled him from his horse with her bare hands. The sight of their leader captured by a single warrior broke the enemy's will. The battle turned, and Kaidu's army was saved. This was not an isolated incident. Again and again, KHUTULUN proved herself in the crucible of war. She was not just a symbol, she was a strategist, a tactician, a leader who understood the psychology of battle as well as its brutality. Her soldiers followed her not because they were ordered to, but because she won. She protected her people, took risks for them, and shared in their hardships. In one desperate retreat, when the rear guard was being cut to pieces by pursuing cavalry, KHUTULUN rallied every available rider and led a countercharge that shattered the enemy and saved the army. Her men called her the princess who fights like 10 men, but those who served under her had another name, the shield of the people. Yet with every victory, the pressure on KHUTULUN grew. Her power was undeniable, her legend unstoppable. But in the world of the Mongols, power was a double-edged sword. Kaidu, growing older and more weary with each campaign, began to think of succession. By tradition, one of his sons should inherit his position, but none of them matched KHUTULUN's record, her loyalty, or her skill. Whispers began to circulate. What if Kaidu named his daughter as his heir? The idea was radical, even dangerous. The Mongol Empire had never had a female Khan. Allies might rebel, enemies might see weakness, and her own brothers, 14 of them, would not accept being passed over. KHUTULUN saw the storm coming. She understood that her father's favor, once a blessing, was becoming a curse. The court was divided, the family on the brink of civil war. In private, Kaidu made his preference clear. KHUTULUN is worth any 10 of my sons, he told his advisors. She has proven herself in every way that matters. But the advisors pushed back. The empire will not follow a woman, they warned. Your allies will desert you, your enemies will attack. It was a trap with no good solution. If Kaidu named KHUTULUN as his heir, he risked tearing his family and his realm apart. If he did not, he would be passing over the most qualified candidate for the sake of tradition. KHUTULUN, ever the strategist, made her own choice. She approached her father and said, "You must choose one of my brothers as your heir. If you name me, there will be war. Everything we have built will be destroyed." It was a moment of selflessness, a sacrifice as great as any made on the battlefield. She chose unity over ambition, her people over her own claim to power. In the end, Kaidu named his brother Horus as his successor, with KHUTULUN as his chief military commander. The crisis was averted, the family held together by the strength of the woman who could have ruled them all.
The years that followed saw KHUTULUN's legend deepen, not just as a warrior and commander, but as a woman who navigated the treacherous currents of power, loyalty, and expectation. With her brother Horus as Khan and KHUTULUN as his chief military commander, the Kaidu Khanate remained a formidable force on the steppe. Yet, as she led armies and secured victories, the question of her personal life became a subject of fascination and controversy among her people and the chroniclers who would later record her story.
For more than 2 decades, KHUTULUN had refused every suitor who came to her father's camp. The wrestling matches had become legendary, drawing challengers from across Asia. Some came for glory, others for alliance, and a few, perhaps, for love. But none could defeat her. Each loss added to her herd of horses and to her reputation as the unconquerable princess. The spectacle of these contests was more than entertainment. It was a public assertion of her autonomy, a declaration that she would not be bartered or subdued. In a society where women's choices were often circumscribed by politics and tradition, KHUTULUN's defiance was both radical and magnetic. But as the years passed and her father's health declined, the pressure mounted. The court, her brothers, and even her allies began to insist that she marry. They argued that she needed an heir, that her power would be more secure with a husband at her side, that the stability of the Khanate depended on her conforming, at least in part, to the expectations of her station. KHUTULUN, however, remained unmoved. She had seen too many women lose themselves in marriages of convenience, their ambitions and talents subsumed by the needs of their husbands or the demands of politics. She would not surrender her freedom, not even for the sake of peace. It was at this point that the rumors began to swirl. Some whispered that KHUTULUN was in love with one of her father's trusted generals, a man of humble birth but great loyalty. Others claimed she had taken lovers in secret, or that she was incapable of love at all, her heart as hard as the steppe itself. The most malicious rumors accused her of poisoning her father or murdering her brothers to secure her own power. Chroniclers, unable to reconcile her achievements with their own biases, suggested that she must have used witchcraft or deceit to win her victories. These stories, though unfounded, reveal as much about the anxieties of her world as they do about KHUTULUN herself. Through it all, KHUTULUN remained focused on her duties. She continued to lead armies, to protect her people, to serve as the shield of her family and her Khanate. Her leadership was not just a matter of battlefield prowess, it was a matter of character. She was known for her fairness, her willingness to listen to her soldiers, her refusal to tolerate cruelty or injustice. In a world where power was often wielded through fear, KHUTULUN inspired loyalty through respect. Her men followed her not because they were compelled, but because they believed in her. The story of her eventual marriage is shrouded in uncertainty. Some sources claim that after her father's death, KHUTULUN finally chose a husband, not a prince or a champion, but a man of proven loyalty and quiet strength. His name is lost to history, and the marriage itself was a private affair, lacking the pomp and ceremony that might have been expected for a princess of her stature. What is clear is that KHUTULUN did not relinquish her command or her independence. She continued to lead, to fight, to shape the destiny of her people. Her husband, by all accounts, accepted his role as consort to a legend, content to stand beside a woman whose fame eclipsed his own. Yet even in this, KHUTULUN's story stands in contrast to the narratives of her time. She did not marry for alliance or ambition, but for trust and companionship. She did not step back from public life, but continued to serve as a leader and protector. Her marriage, like her life, was on her own terms, a final assertion of her autonomy in a world that sought to define her by the men around her. As KHUTULUN aged, her influence did not wane. She remained a central figure in the politics of the Khanate, advising her brother, leading campaigns, and mediating disputes among the nobility.
Her reputation as a warrior was matched by her reputation as a peacemaker, a woman who could bring rivals to the table and forge alliances where others saw only enmity. In this, she embodied the dual nature of Mongol leadership, the ability to wield both the sword and the olive branch, to inspire both fear and admiration. But the world was changing. The unity of the Mongol Empire was fracturing, old alliances crumbling under the weight of ambition and betrayal. New powers were rising, and the steppe was no longer the unchallenged domain of the descendants of Genghis Khan. KHUTULUN, ever the realist, saw the dangers ahead. She counseled caution, urged her family to seek peace where possible, to avoid the civil wars that had destroyed so many great houses before them. Her final years are veiled in mystery. Some say she died in battle, leading her men against impossible odds. Others claim she died peacefully, surrounded by family and loyal followers. The truth, as with so much of her life, is lost to time. What remains is the legacy she left behind, a legend that refused to be silenced, a story that continues to inspire. Centuries after KHUTULUN's death, her story would echo far beyond the Mongol steppe, transformed and retold in ways that both honored and obscured her true legacy. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who spent years at the court of Kublai Khan, was among the first Westerners to record tales of the Mongol princess who could defeat any man in wrestling. In his accounts, she appears as a figure of wonder and skepticism, a woman whose strength and independence seemed almost mythical to European audiences. Polo called her Aigyarn, likely derived from one of KHUTULUN's Mongolian titles, and described her as a warrior who demanded that any man wishing to marry her must first best her in single combat. The image of a princess who could not be conquered, who amassed thousands of horses from defeated suitors, captured the imagination of readers across continents.
But as her legend traveled, it changed. In the centuries that followed, KHUTULUN's story was woven into the fabric of folklore and art, sometimes losing its historical grounding but gaining new layers of meaning. In 18th century Italy, playwright Carlo Gozzi reimagined her as Turandot, a Chinese princess who challenged her suitors with riddles rather than wrestling. The tale was further immortalized in the early 20th century by composer Giacomo Puccini, whose opera Turandot became one of the most famous in the world. In Puccini's version, the princess is cold and unyielding, her heart thawed only by the persistence of a worthy suitor. The wrestling matches are replaced by deadly riddles, the Mongol steppe by the imagined grandeur of ancient China. Millions have watched Turandot's story unfold on stage, unaware that its roots lie in the life of a real Mongol princess who refused to be conquered. This transformation is both a tribute and a tragedy. On one hand, it speaks to the enduring power of KHUTULUN's legend, the way her defiance and strength resonated across cultures and centuries. On the other, it reveals how history often reshapes extraordinary women, turning them into symbols or archetypes, stripping away the complexity of their real lives. The real KHUTULUN was not a riddle-posing ice queen, nor a mere footnote in her father's biography. She was a leader, a strategist, a woman who carved her own path in a world that offered her few choices. In Mongolia, however, her memory has endured in a more authentic form. Oral traditions passed down through generations have kept her story alive. In the songs and stories of the steppe, KHUTULUN is remembered as a national hero, a symbol of what Mongol women can achieve. Wrestling tournaments are still held in her honor, and young girls are taught that her strength and courage are part of their heritage. Modern historians, too, have begun to reassess her importance, recognizing her not just as a curiosity, but as a significant political and military figure in her own right. KHUTULUN's life challenges the assumptions of her time and ours. She proved that leadership and valor are not the exclusive domain of men, that tradition is not destiny, and that the boundaries imposed by society can be broken by those with the will to defy them.
She did all of this without the language of modern feminism, without the support of movements or manifestos. She simply lived as she saw fit, refusing to ask permission for her own greatness. Yet the very qualities that made her exceptional also made her a target. The rumors and accusations that dogged her in life did not end with her death. Later chroniclers, unable to accept that a woman could achieve so much through skill and merit alone, invented stories to explain her success. They claimed she used poison, witchcraft, or treachery. They suggested that her victories were the result of luck or the indulgence of her father. These narratives, though discredited by modern scholarship, reveal the deep discomfort that KHUTULUN's story provoked in those who recorded it. But the evidence tells a different tale. KHUTULUN's achievements were not the product of magic or manipulation, but of talent, discipline, and determination. She trained harder than her brothers, fought more fiercely than her rivals, and led with a combination of strength and wisdom that few could match. Her decision to step aside from the succession, to place the unity of her family above her own ambition, was not a sign of weakness, but of extraordinary foresight and self-control. In a world where power was often seized by force, KHUTULUN understood that true leadership sometimes means knowing when to let go. Her legacy endures not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She struggled, she sacrificed, she made difficult choices. She was both a product of her time and a force that transcended it. In the centuries since her death, countless women have faced similar challenges, expected to be less, to do less, to accept the limits imposed upon them. KHUTULUN's story is a reminder that those limits are not immutable, that they can be shattered by those with the courage to try. As we look back on her life, it is tempting to see KHUTULUN as a solitary figure, unique and unrepeatable. But her story is also a window into a world where women, though often hidden by history, played vital roles as warriors, leaders, and creators. For every KHUTULUN whose name survives, there are countless others whose stories have been lost. Their achievements, erased or forgotten, are part of the same legacy, a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and defiance. KHUTULUN's life was a testament to the power of possibility. She proved that greatness is not given but earned, that respect is not inherited but won, that the only permission needed to be extraordinary is one's own. Her story, passed down through centuries, continues to inspire those who hear it, a beacon shining across the steppe and into the future. If you stand today on the vast Mongolian steppe, where the grass ripples like a green sea and the sky is impossibly wide, you might still hear echoes of KHUTULUN's legend in the wind. Her story is not just a tale of the past, but a living force, woven into the identity of a people who have always valued strength, independence, and the courage to defy the odds. In the centuries since her death, KHUTULUN has become more than a historical figure. She is a symbol, a challenge, and a promise to every generation that follows. What makes KHUTULUN's story so enduring is not just her physical prowess or her victories in battle, but the way she navigated the complexities of power, family, and tradition. She was born into a world that expected her to be silent, obedient, and useful only as a tool for alliance. Instead, she became a voice that could not be ignored, a force that could not be contained. Her life was a series of choices, some bold, some painful, all her own. She chose to train with her brothers, to fight for her father, to refuse every suitor who saw her as a prize rather than a partner. She chose to lead, to protect, to sacrifice her own ambitions for the good of her family and her people. Contrast her story with the countless women of her era whose names have been lost to history, whose talents were never recognized, whose lives were shaped by the decisions of others. KHUTULUN's defiance was not just personal, it was revolutionary. She showed that a woman could be more than a wife or a mother, more than a pawn in the games of men. She could be a champion, a commander, a legend.
and in doing so, she opened a door that can never be fully closed. Yet KHUTULUN's life was not without its shadows. The very qualities that made her extraordinary also set her apart, sometimes painfully so. She was admired, but also feared, respected, but also resented. Her brothers, who had grown up alongside her, could not help but feel the sting of comparison. Her father, proud as he was, struggled to balance his love for his daughter with the demands of tradition and politics. The court, the chroniclers, the world at large, all tried to fit her into boxes she refused to occupy. The rumors, the accusations, the attempts to diminish her achievements, these were the price she paid for her greatness. But KHUTULUN never let the judgments of others define her. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that history is written by those who survive, and that survival on the steppe required both strength and adaptability. She was not afraid to make hard choices, to step aside when necessary, to put the needs of her people above her own desires. In this, she was not just a warrior, but a leader in the truest sense. Her story also reminds us of the power of narrative, how the tales we tell shape our understanding of the world and our place in it. For centuries, KHUTULUN's legend was reshaped, retold, and sometimes distorted by those who could not accept the reality of her achievements. Yet the core of her story remained, a woman who refused to be less than she was, who demanded respect on her own terms, who proved that greatness is not a matter of gender, but of character. Today, as historians and storytellers work to recover the voices of women lost to time, KHUTULUN stands as both an inspiration and a challenge. Her life asks us to reconsider what we think we know about the past, to question the stories that have been handed down to us, and to seek out the truths that lie beneath the surface. In Mongolia, KHUTULUN's legacy is alive in more than just memory. Her name is invoked at wrestling tournaments, her story taught to children as an example of courage and independence. Statues and monuments honor her, and scholars continue to debate the details of her life and the meaning of her achievements. But perhaps her greatest legacy is the sense of possibility she left behind, the idea that anyone, regardless of birth or gender, can shape their own destiny. As we bring her story to a close, it is worth reflecting on the lessons KHUTULUN offers us today. In a world that still struggles with questions of equality, representation, and the limits of tradition, her life is a testament to the power of individual agency. She did not wait for permission to be extraordinary. She simply was. She did not ask for validation from those who doubted her. She earned it through action. She did not allow the expectations of others to define her. She defined herself, again and again, in the face of every challenge. So the next time you hear the wind sweeping across the open steppe, remember KHUTULUN, the princess who could beat every warrior, the commander who led armies, the woman who refused to be anything less than herself. Her story is not just a relic of the past, but a call to courage for all who hear it. Be strong, be brave, be yourself, no matter what the world says. That is the true legacy of KHUTULUN, and that is a legacy that belongs to us all.